Welcome and thank you for joining us for this LSVT Global webinar titled Client Experiences with LSVT Loud and LSVT Big. My name is Beth Marcoux and I'll be the moderator and one of the presenters for today, along with my colleague, Angela Halpern. First, just a couple of disclosures. All of the LSVT Big and Loud faculty have both financial and non-financial relationships with LSVT Global. Our non-financial relationships include a preference for LSVT Loud and LSVT Big as treatment techniques. Financially, Ms. Halpern is an employee of LSVT Global and I'm a consultant for them. Both of us receive lecture honorarium and travel reimbursement from LSVT Global. I'd like to go over the plan for our webinar today so you know what to expect. First, I'll go over some logistics to familiarize you with the setup. In terms of logistics, right now only the presenters have their microphones unmuted. Everyone in the audience has their microphone muted to ensure that we aren't getting background noise from the various environment where you may be joining us. However, if you have a question at any time during the webinar, feel free to ask. There are a few ways that you can ask your questions today. First, you can click on the hand icon on your control panel. We will be alerted that you have a question and will unmute your microphone and call out your name so that you know you're unmuted and can ask your question aloud. A second way to ask a question is to type your question in the question box on your control panel. You can send your question to the presenters and we'll read your question out loud to the group. A final way to ask a question is if we run out of time or if you think of additional questions after the webinar ends, you can always email us at info@lsvtglobal.com and we'll get in touch with you to answer your question. I'll display that email address at the end of the webinar so you can see it on your screen. All of you should have received a handout of the presentation via email today, but the handout is also available under the Handouts tab on your webinar control panel. The plan for the presentation is that we'll describe the basics of LSVT Loud and Big, and then have our guest panelists join us for a discussion of their personal experiences with both LSVT Loud and Big, and then we'll take your questions. Finally, at the end of the webinar, there'll be a brief survey asking for your feedback on the webinar. We greatly appreciate you taking the time to complete this survey. For those professionals who have joined the webinar, this slide provides you with information about the self-reported continuing education activity. LSVT Global, this webinar is not ASHA or state registered for CEUs, but it may be used for self-reported CEU credit as a non-registered CEU activity. If you're a speech, physical, or occupational therapy professional and would like to self-report your activity, please email webinars@lsvtglobal.com to request a certificate after completion of the webinar, which will include your name, date, and duration of the webinar. Licensing requirements for CEUs differ by state, so be sure to check with your licensing bureau to determine if your state accepts non-ASHA registered CEU activities. Finally, attendance for the full hour is required to earn a certificate. Today's instructors include myself, Beth Marcoux. I have a PhD in public health, a bachelor's degree and master's degree in physical therapy, as well as a clinical doctorate in physical therapy. I've served on a number of different faculties, most recently as chair of the University of Rhode Island Physical Therapy Program. And in 2008, I was certified to become an LSVT Big therapist. And for the past several years, I've had a personal private practice here in New Hampshire that's focused only on the treatment of patients with Parkinson's disease using only LSVT Big. Angela Halpern is Chief Clinical Officer of LSVT Loud and a research associate with Dr. Lorraine Ramick at the National Center for Voice and Speech in Denver, Colorado. She has a master's degree in the Department of Communication Services and Disorders at the University of Pittsburgh and has been LSVT Loud certified since 1997. She's worked extensively in the area of neurogenic disorders with a specialty in Parkinson's disease, and she's presented at national and international conferences and authored publications and co-publications related to voice and speech in Parkinson's disease. We're very excited to have as our guest panelists today 3 people who have completed LSVT Loud or LSVT Big. So Dolores, Ethan, and Patty will be joining us a little bit later in the webinar. And right now, I'd like to turn it over to Angela.
Great, thanks so much, Beth. Well, I'm excited to be with everyone here today with what I know will be a fun and inspiring webinar. Because people are joining us with varying levels of exposure to LSVT Loud and LSVT Big, we want to spend just a brief amount of time at the beginning here reviewing the concepts behind the treatment approaches, and so that everyone has a foundation for understanding LSVT Loud and LSVT Big. However, we really want to keep that section brief because the important heart of the webinar is for us to hear from Dolores, Ethan, and Patty. Next slide, please. It's important as therapists delivering treatment and as people participating in treatment that the treatments we deliver or participate in are backed by high quality, randomized controlled trial research that's published in reputable journals. So if you're a person with Parkinson's, you're busy, you have a lot of appointments, a lot of exercise classes. So I always tell the people I work with, it's important to make sure that when you do participate in something, that your time is well spent and you know the research evidence behind what you're doing that's there to support the effectiveness of the treatment. So with LSVT treatments, you can be confident in the research. They're backed by over 25 years of NIH-funded research and clinical experience. So LSVT Loud is a speech therapy. LSVT Big is a physical occupational therapy. Because these treatments are backed by this proven research, we really feel it's important to ensure that people across the globe receive the same fidelity of treatment. So therefore, if a speech therapist wants to deliver LSVT Loud, they need to go through a 2-day training and certification course to become certified so they can deliver the treatment according to the research. Same with LSVT Big. If a PT or OT wants to deliver that treatment, they need to go through the 2-day LSVT Big training and certification course. And then these individuals are listed on our website as LSVT Loud or LSVT Big certified, so when people are looking for certified therapists, they can find them. Next slide, please. We'll just touch next on the fundamentals of LSVT Loud and LSVT Big. They are standardized protocols because of the research base, but what we really like to stress is it's definitely not cookie cutter. Within these treatments, the personalization is really important. So the therapist finds out what are the personal goals for the person participating and then takes that protocol and uses the elements of the protocol with the personalization for each individual. So in case there are people who aren't familiar with the treatments, I'll quickly touch on the fundamentals of why the treatment's effective. They incorporate principles of neuroplasticity, including to be effective, treatments need to target specific deficits. So in Parkinson's disease, there's a decreased amplitude across the motor speech system and the motor system. And so this can result in a quieter voice and smaller movements. So a target is to increase amplitude by increasing either the bigness of the movement or loudness of speech. And this isn't overdone for movements that are too big or speech that's too loud, it's to normal levels. Then the mode, we see in neuroplasticity that intensity of treatment is important for long-lasting change. So the treatments are 4 times a week for 4 weeks, 1-hour individual sessions to get that intensive, high effort treatment that's important. And finally, a unique aspect of the treatments is the recognition that Parkinson's affects the sensory system as well. So we can do all the great motor practice we want, but then our patients tell us, well, this voice feels too loud or these movements feel too big. And that's because there's a sensory mismatch in that smaller movements or a quieter voice feel normal to people. And then when we bump up the amplitude to help people to talk at a normal loudness or move at a normal amplitude, our patients will comment, I'm moving too big or I'm talking too loudly. So a part of the treatment is to directly target that sensory mismatch, retrain the sensory system so that people can independently or internally cue to the proper amount of loudness or bigness that's required to be within normal limits. Next slide. This, we're just going to touch on a couple of slides to show you some of that research evidence. So because the treatments treat both the motor and the sensory component and incorporate these principles of neuroplasticity, we see clinically and through our research that change can be long-lasting. So what you're looking at here is a graph showing changes in loudness, and that's documented by sound pressure level on the y-axis. And this is during a reading activity pre and post treatment. So in the graph, it's comparing people who received LSVT loud in the red line and people who received a comparative intensive treatment focusing on respiration in blue. And there were 45 people initially in the study, and due to attrition, a smaller group at the 24-month mark. But you see from pre to post, marked by that first spike on the left-hand side of the graph, the people in the LSVT loud group showed greater improvements in loudness than the respiratory group. These did drop a bit at 6 months, but then they were relatively stable at 12 to 24 months. So this demonstrates that long-lasting treatment effect that I was just describing. Next slide. Now let's look at an example for LSVT big. This graph is looking at change in the UPDRS, which is the United Parkinson's Disease Rating Scale, and it's taking the motor score from that. And so what we're going to see here is from baseline or pre to post at the 4-week mark, and then out to 16 weeks looking at maintenance. On this scale, a lower score indicates improvement. So what you see on the graph are individuals who participated in LSVT big in the dashed line, those that participated in a comparative Nordic walking program in the dotted line, and those who did a home program in the solid line. So it's clear that the people in the LSVT big group demonstrated a lower or better score post that continued out to that 16-week mark than those in the comparative groups. Next slide. So very briefly, what happens in a month of treatment for LSVT loud and LSVT big? Each treatment is delivered 4 consecutive days a week for 4 weeks. These are obviously delivered separately. So LSVT loud is with the speech therapist, LSVT big with the physical or occupational therapist. And within those 1-hour sessions, that intensity of treatment is delivered. Daily home practice is assigned. It's short, doesn't take much time, but that's important for that carryover. And within the home practice, there are specific carryover exercises that are assigned as well. So those are functional things to really take the components learned in LSVT loud or LSVT big into people's everyday life. Because it's essential that this lifelong habit of practice for once treatment is over is established. Next slide. So within an LSVT loud treatment session, within that 1 hour, we're doing some maximum duration, sustained vowel phonation, or more simply, and these are done in multiple repetitions, and this is really designed to help to strengthen the whole motor speech system, but also retrain people the effort and loudness that's needed when they talk. In Parkinson's disease, people's voices can become monotone, and so we do pitch stretch exercises. Number 2, these frequency range exercises. The idea being it's not a singing exercise, but rather to help get more intonation into voice and speech. And then the third daily exercise that's done every day are people come up with 10 things that they say daily. And these are practiced at least 5 times a day. The idea is they become so overlearned that it serves as a cue or a hook when they say that particular phrase outside of the treatment room. So if someone's phrase is, I love you, that they say that daily to the spouse and then go home and say, I love you in their new loud voice, it reminds them to be loud. The second half of the session is what we call the speech hierarchy. And this starts simple and gradually gets more complex across the 4 weeks of treatment, starting at a word phrase level with the ultimate goal being conversation. And it's done through structured reading tasks and conversation tasks and also cognitive tasks. And so throughout that, the goal is that by session 16, people have this stronger voice that they can use independently. And as I mentioned earlier, it's really important when we look at principles of neuroplasticity, the materials be salient and individualized to each person. So the therapist will find out, if I'm working with someone, I'll find out their hobbies, their goals, their interests, and then all of our reading and conversation activities are structured around that. So that's going to generalize much better than someone just reading a cookie cutter standardized workbook. And then, as I mentioned, there is home practice daily, so people can learn to do the exercises on their own and continue to practice after therapy's over, and then using that loud voice in real life situations through carryover exercises that are personal and salient to each individual person. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Beth, and she's going to tell you about the LSVT treatment sessions.
Thanks, Angela. So LSVT Big was built on LSVT Loud, so the sessions are very similar. The first half of the session is spent doing the 7 maximum daily exercises, and there are 7 because the body moves in so many different directions, whereas for the voice, it's simply 2 exercises. So we do some exercises that serve as the foundation for all future movements. And once you gain expertise and in practicing these exercises, it relates to all future movements that you're going to use throughout the day. So the 7 maximum daily exercises are extremely important. In addition to that, we identify 5 component tasks, functional component tasks that people will do every day. We pick 5 of them and they repeat each one 5 times. Because those, like with the voice, they serve as hooks to remind patients to move big throughout their day. So for example, the first one that everyone does is sit to stand, because you'll sit and stand 200 and 300 times in a day when you're working at your desk, when you're going to the bathroom, when you're eating dinners. So sit to stand is something that everyone does. And then the other 4 are tasks that are unique to that individual. So some might be pulling keys out of a pocket. I have one patient who's working on throwing a tennis ball up in the air to work on his tennis serve. So they're all uniquely identified for the particular patient or client that we're working with. The second half of the session involves big walking. And again, not too big, but normal big. We try to get the patients to walk with a good arm swing and good stride length so that they look normal and move and feel like they're moving normally throughout their day. And then the other pieces of that second half are hierarchy exercises, and these are patient identified goals or tasks that they want to work on. Maybe playing golf, maybe getting in and out of the car, or getting in and out of a bed. And so we break those tasks down to find out what's the most difficult aspect and work on those pieces across the 4 weeks, making the sessions and the activities more complex so that by the end of the 4 weeks, they can perform those tasks with relative ease. Like LSVT Loud, the homework involves doing all of the daily exercises, the functional component tasks, walking big, and then a carryover exercise that helps patients to realize that not only can they use the big movements when they're in the safety of a clinical setting with a therapist, but also that they can use them outside the treatment area and in their everyday lives. Again, carryover tasks and homework is assigned all 30 days of the month that we are working with our clients. Our goals for patients with Parkinson's disease, whether it's LSVT loud or LSVT big, is that patients will use their bigger movements and their louder voices automatically in everyday living, and that there will be long-term carryover of increased amplitude use for both their voice and their movements. So after treatment, and you can hear from all the guest panelists who are coming up, our goal is for them to continue their daily dose of LSVT big homework exercises. They'll take their medications, they'll use their louder voice, and they'll move with greater amplitude. And we feel like that's the best combination for success. So I'm now going to turn it back to Angela for her interview with Dolores.
Great, thank you so much. All right, so as we dig in here, Dolores, I just want to thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate that you're taking the time to join us and share your experiences. And I think everyone on the webinar can agree, it's just so helpful for people attending to get insights and impressions from someone who's actually experienced LSVT loud treatment as a participant. For our listeners, just to let you know, I've had the privilege of knowing Dolores for several years now, and she's currently a member of the Loud for Life class that I teach. So not only will I be asking her questions about LSVT loud treatment, but I'll also discuss with her impressions of this Loud for Life maintenance class for LSVT loud graduates as well. All right, so Dolores, let's get started. Our first question is, can you please share with everyone when you were diagnosed with Parkinson's and what your initial symptoms were?
Thank you, Angela. I was diagnosed in 2010, and my initial symptom was not swinging my right arm and tremor on my right leg. I did have a fall where I went to the doctor and had a concussion, and my primary care doctor noticed my tremor and made an appointment with the neurology for me, and neurologist diagnosed it immediately.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. And then when did you first start to notice symptoms affecting your communication?
Well, it was around about that same time, probably a year or so before. I didn't feel like I was being heard when I talked to a group. Maybe the people right in front could hear me, but the people in the back were not with me at all. And first I blamed them, of course, but I had to almost feel like I was yelling at them before I could be heard. And I knew something was gradually not right.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And I think that's an important part that you bring up. I know I have a lot of people coming to me who, aren't aware that Parkinson's can affect the voice and speech. And so they may have noticed some of these things you're talking about, but didn't know it was even related to Parkinson's. Or like you were saying, you thought it was them. People think, oh, someone has a hearing loss. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I thought my husband should get his hearing checked.
Yes.
And yes. And you're right. I had no idea that Parkinson's affected the voice.
So before receiving LSVT Loud, you touched on this a bit, but can you tell us a little bit more about the types of situations you found it most difficult to communicate in?
Well, at the time I was still working, and I am a teacher, so communicating in my classroom was getting more and more difficult. I also found that when I was in a crowd of people and there was background noise, such as a noisy restaurant, I just generally gave up and said, I'll talk to these people later or one-on-one. But so I just sat there and observed what was going on rather than taking part in it.
Which I'm sure was really frustrating.
It really was. And I had no idea what was happening at all. Mm-hmm. And so until I learned more and more and went to more meetings and seminars, and people were talking about the voice being affected, and thought maybe that was my problem. Of course, now I tend to blame almost everything on Parkinson's first, but in that case, I was right.
Yes. So at that time, before you had treatment, what were some of the things you were really concerned about and didn't want to lose the ability to be able to do related to voice and speech?
Yeah. Well, I think it really did concern me that I felt like I couldn't take part in a conversation in a little noisier environment. That had never happened before. And I felt that the more I sat in the background and just listened, the more I wasn't acknowledged as even being there. And I thought, my goodness, is this going to continue to get worse? And am I going to even be part of a group anymore?
Mm-hmm. Which, I mean, communication is so essential to our personality and our sense of self that
right.
I know from what you're saying and from what other people have told me, that can be really isolating and frustrating when you feel like you're not being heard. Yes.
And I was afraid that was going to happen.
So how did you learn about LSVT Loud? Let's talk a bit now about your treatment experience.
Okay. I don't recall exactly how I learned about a study that you were conducting. It may have been through a newsletter, or a friend told me about it, or I got an email. I don't recall, but I did decide that I would apply to participate in this study. And you needed a group of people who had Parkinson's and then one that did not. And my husband joined that group. And then, of course, I was lucky in the Parkinson's group to be selected to be a part that received training. So that's how I started the training.
Great. And so some of this data, when I was talking at the beginning of the webinar about LSVT Loud, has 3 randomized controlled trials, and you were a part of that 3rd randomized controlled trial. So your contribution really had a large impact for a lot of people. So can you share a bit about your treatment experience?
Well, it was not easy, and it took a lot of time, and we had to drive downtown. I had to go downtown every day for 4 weeks, 4 times a week. Not every day, I guess Friday we didn't meet, and work with the therapist one-on-one for an hour, a full hour. So that was a bit grueling. The saving grace was that she was wonderful and made it fun as well. You mentioned looking at people's interests. She tried to find out what I was interested in, and we spent a lot of time talking about those topics. So it made it more interesting for me. And I learned how to do the exercises properly, which there's a right and a wrong way, lots of wrong ways to do them, of course. And I saw progress almost daily. I can remember walking into the office and saying, "Hello, Jennifer," and she would say, "What?" And so she never missed the opportunity to get me to speak up, speak louder. Every time I dropped a little bit, she would say, "What?" "I can't quite hear you now." And so it made me so much more aware of the fact that I actually was too quiet.
Great. So yes, you've hit on some of those things I introduced at the beginning, that it's the motor practice, and yes, it's intensive, but that's what's important for long-term change. And that great description you just gave of some examples of the sensory component retraining. So you saw my voice is too quiet. I need to get it louder. And then also the saliency of personalized materials. So yeah, great, great.
Well, and that she gave we did that example of reading something at the beginning, and then when we ended after 4 weeks, we listened to it again, and that was an amazing experience to hear how we sounded when we started and how we sounded at the end.
Yes.
Big improvement. I was shocked that I sounded as quiet as I did in the beginning.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. So after treatment, you're kind of leading into this. What kind of changes did you notice in your voice and speech, if any?
Well, immediately after, it was great, and I continued practicing pretty good, I think, for quite a while. But as life got busier and things changed, my amount of practice declined a bit, and I could feel that it was more of an effort to talk louder, and I was losing some of it.
Okay, and so we'll get into that part in just a second. Right after treatment, when you said you did notice some changes, what types of things did you notice right after treatment, and maybe communication situations you felt like you were participating in, or that sort of thing?
Yeah. Well, right after the treatment, I did have a stronger voice, a louder voice, and I still continued to work, but I worked part-time at that point, and so I taught like 2 classes a week for several years, and that became much easier and much well, it becomes part of you that you speak louder. You don't have to think about it quite as much. So I really do give all the credit to the loud treatment that I'd had.
Okay, so thank you for sharing that. We'll jump now to, because you mentioned you practiced, and then over time it got a little more difficult to continue that practicing, which is something that we're all human. We can, you know, if I'm practicing for a race or a marathon, I can get myself to a certain level, but I have to continue practicing to keep that level up. And so one of the reasons that we created the Loud for Life and Big for Life are the idea that they're maintenance groups for people once they have finished LSVT Loud or LSVT Big therapy, to serve as an extra motivator to continue to practice. And so we'll talk next about the Loud for Life group that I lead, and Dolores, that you've been a part of for about 3 years now, I think. And so the idea is everyone meeting together weekly. We practice the ahs and the highs and lows and the functional phrases. And then the second part of the group is always some sort of cognitive communication activity based on what the group wants to work on for communication. So now that you've been participating in Loud for Life, do you feel like it's easier to maintain a stronger, louder voice while you've been doing Loud for Life versus when you weren't attending it?
Oh, I definitely do think so. There's that accountability of going back to class every Monday and giving you the practice sheet, and knowing that I did or did not do as well the week before. So accountability to me helps an awfully lot. That it's not that you fail us at all, but I just know that I know what needs to be done, and I know whether I've been successful or not, and I have to write it down on that paper and hand it to you. So it does help me a lot to recall that. But I have no one at home now to motivate me and say, have you done your loud yet today, or anything like that. So I have to come up with lots of ways of continuing to practice, and I think the Loud for Life is very important in that, for that reason.
Great, thank you for sharing that. And yeah, on these home practice, for those of you listening, we do home practice competitions, just like you might do at the gym, where you reach a certain level of home practice. And so we have the gold level competition, and people track their home practice and bring that in, and we have prizes with that. So Dolores, beyond the maintenance of treatment effects, which you mentioned, you feel like Loud for Life helps you to maintain a stronger voice and helps you to practice more, which are some of those fundamentals we want to achieve. What have you found most beneficial about attending Loud for Life beyond the direct treatment impact?
You know, the main thing is the social interaction with the other students in class. It's a group of very interesting people who have done interesting things in the past and are still doing very cool things, and they are very well traveled. I gained much from working with them during that second half of class and getting to know them better. I've made some true friends in the group, and every time we get a new person, they come with a different background still, so very, very interesting. And we learn from each other, and they're also very good listeners because, you know, they have done a lot, but they want to hear what you've done as well. So it really helps my self-esteem, my well-being, to think that I can be part of such a group.
Great, great. Well, and I know the other people in the group feel the same about you. And we have a lot of fun together. It's a great group of people.
Oh,
so
we
can
do.
You talk
We
a
do.
little bit more about, just to wrap up here, how you feel like your voice and speech and life has changed as a result of LSVT Loud, participating in Loud for Life? You know, kind of outside, do you feel like you're more involved with other types of activities, your confidence, things like that?
You know, what I have done this last year is join several groups that require me to speak quite a bit. I have joined a tutoring group. We tutor elementary school age children out of a church in a poor area of town where the children need a little extra help. And each one is assigned to one child, and there are 25 children and 25 tutors in a relatively small room, and the noise level sometimes just gets a little high. And if without the training, I would have given up a long time ago and said, I can't be heard, I'm going to quit trying. But if I remember to speak loud and feel as though I'm yelling at my student, she hears me. But she doesn't think that I'm yelling. Only I think that. And I've also joined one ladies' Bible study, just ladies, and then another one that is adults of all ages and males as well. And of course, all of that requires a lot of talking and discussion groups. And I also have joined a book club. And so I think that I have increased the amount of communicating with others quite a bit since I've been working with Loud for Life.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for sharing all these fantastic insights, and we really appreciate it. You are truly an inspiration, and personally, I think you're a rock star, so keep up all that fantastic work.
Thank you very much, Angela, and thank you for all the work that you do, and I thoroughly enjoy the class.
Great, great. Well, thank you, Dolores. I'm going to turn it back over to Beth now for our next interviews.
Great. Thank you so much, Dolores. And Angela, that was just wonderful to hear. I'm also excited to interview Ethan and Patty, both graduates of LSVT Big. We're going to hit the similar questions that Angela asked Dolores, and we're going to try to have this sort of a three-way conversation. So we're going to start with Ethan. Can you tell us when you were diagnosed with Parkinson's and what your initial symptoms were?
Yeah, thanks, Beth, for having me. Officially diagnosed almost the day 3 years ago. Been having symptoms prior to that for about 5-6 years of tremor in the right hand and dragging the right leg, and imbalance issues that thought were just normal, but obviously weren't. So got shuffled around from a few doctors here and there, and then ended up getting a referral to see a neurologist who quickly diagnosed the Parkinson's.
Okay, thanks, Ethan. I really appreciate that. And Patty, can you share with us when you were diagnosed and what your initial symptoms were?
Well, first, can you hear me? First,
Yes.
I'd like to say thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm delighted to be here to share my story. I was diagnosed in 2008, and initially I just had tremors in my right leg. But of course, things progressed rapidly after diagnosis because I went into a deep depression. And I did something that no Parkinson's person should do. I went into isolation. I went into what I call my hermit mode, and it's the worst thing a person can do because then, of course, my symptoms worsened. And soon I was stooped over, shuffling. My left leg was dragging, and I was walking with a cane for balance.
Thank you for sharing that, Patty. It's not uncommon when you can't move well that you begin to not go out and not do things and then become isolated and depressed from that. So before treatment, Ethan, in what situations was it most difficult for you to move?
Definitely in crowded situations. I live in a big city with lots of crowds, and trying to navigate the sidewalks and walkways was always difficult. I would lose my balance and sometimes fall, not completely over, but fall into my wife or into the person who was walking towards me. And then sometimes basically just getting dressed. You know, you're trying to put one foot into your pant leg at one time, and that became a problem. So I had to sit down. Now, after doing this, I don't have those problems really anymore.
Thanks for sharing that. That's a really common problem that patients with Parkinson's have, and sitting down really increases your safety. So it's a wonderful change that you've made.
Good.
Patty, what about situations where you find it was difficult to move prior to treatment?
Well, prior to treatment, I just couldn't walk well because, as I said, I was shuffling, my left leg was dragging. I couldn't do any things I really enjoyed before. But after treatment, then of course I could, but things were really tough for me then.
And Ethan, what things were you most concerned about losing the ability to do prior to treatment?
To continue doing my job where I have to be in front of people all the time and be moving around and being stable, being able to maintain that without the assistance of anything. And then, you know, a lot of the physical things that my wife and I enjoy doing, hiking and being outdoors, things like that. So those are the main things, especially with the imbalance issues that were there prior to doing big.
Thank you for sharing that. And Patty, what things did you want not to lose the ability to do?
I wanted to be able to ride my bike and enjoy the outdoors, as Ethan was speaking about, because I did a lot of hiking in Arizona. And I also didn't want to lose my job, you know, which is always a fear for people. I just wanted to be able to get out and enjoy life again, go out to dinner but riding my bike was important to me, playing volleyball and things like that. Just being active again, because I just couldn't do any of that before the therapy.
That's so common and wonderful comments. So how did you learn about LSVT Big, Ethan?
My neurologist had immediately put in a referral for me for Big and Loud, but I met with the person who does the, I guess the the interview, the beginning part, and saw that my physical was going to be much needed. So we did the big and went through the 4 weeks. And I've continued, even though that was almost 3 years ago, I've continued doing the big exercises every day. I just incorporate it into my morning routine, and I'm really glad that I was quickly sent down to the physical and occupational therapists.
That's wonderful to hear, and wonderful that you're still doing them every day.
Yeah.
And Patty, how did you learn about LSVT Big?
Well, my doctor, my movement disorder specialist, suggested it to me, and she just had suggested it more than once, but I was too stubborn. I thought, oh my God, I'm never going to get any help. Nobody's going to ever be able to help me. And so when I walked in, my wonderful therapist said to me, what do you want out of this? And I'm such a mess, and I'm standing there shuffling. I have a cane. I'm stooped over, and I'm feeling like really nobody's going to be able to help me be able to do anything again. When he asked me that, I thought, is it crazy, So that's when I said, I had a little bit of an attitude. I said, I want to ride my bike again. I want to play volleyball again. You know what? I want to wear heels again. So he said, with your attitude and some hard work, I think you're going to be able to do that. So that's how that all began. I finally did listen to my doctor, thank goodness, and got some help.
That's awesome. Great story. Ethan, can you share a bit about your treatment experience? How was it? Did you enjoy going?
I very much enjoyed going. The people here are fabulous. They they didn't make it easy at all for me. It was always I would say fun, because they made it fun by incorporating the exercises and then adding a few different things on there. If I got to starting to get a little bit more advanced, they would twist, change things around just to try and throw me off. I enjoyed seeing my progress. I enjoyed my family's response to my ability to do more things. So yeah, all the things really made the hard work that I did, not only there at the appointment, but when I went home also would do them, and as I said, continue to.
Wonderful, wonderful. And Patty, how about you? What was your treatment experience like?
Well, it was, I hate to use the word fun, like Ethan said, but it was. I mean, it was a lot of hard work, but I really pushed myself, and as Ethan mentioned too, my therapist pushed me, which was fabulous. And at the end of my treatment, he suggested that, or no, the last day he came to me with volleyball, and we went outside to play volleyball because he knew I liked volleyball so much. And so that was a lot of fun for him to do that. He goes, you're ready for this.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I mean, it was a lot of hard work, and I would work at home because, you have your homework things, but I truly believe it saved me from a wheelchair. And I do the exercises often so that I can move around on our boat. We have a boat in San Diego, and so I want to be able to move and be able to do things. And if I feel like I'm, starting to slouch over or something like that, I'll do certain exercises. If I feel like I'm slow, then I'll do more again, and really pump my arms when I'm walking. So all those things help me to, as I said, to take this therapy, save me from a wheelchair. I truly believe that.
Mm-hmm.
So, Ethan, what do you think are the biggest changes that you've noticed since treatment?
Great question, Beth. Well, definitely my balance. There's no question at all. I don't really have any major balance issues anymore. I feel confident doing a lot of things because the core activities that they also incorporate into the movement has made me stronger, upper and lower body. And I think uh, I mentioned to you earlier, I'm also a runner, and so it has given me the confidence to be able to make sure I can run long distances and not feel that I need to run with someone, that I have that confidence back that I used to have.
That's awesome. And Patty, how about you? What's the biggest change that you've noticed?
Well, I'm able to, do things like riding my bike and those things again. So I was just thrilled to be able to do that. And so shortly after my therapy, I decided that, well, I started riding my bike. First, I started on a stationary bike. I was doing water aerobics, normal water aerobics, not a different kind or a dumbed down water aerobics. I was doing regular water aerobics. I was doing, so I started my stationary biking and I thought, well, I'll be able to bike. So I started riding my bike outside. And so that was a lot of fun. And then I started wearing my heels again. And first I started like a 2-inch heel, then a 3-inch heel. And I thought, well, wouldn't this be fun if I combined those and did a fundraiser for Parkinson's research? So I did that a couple of times, but they weren't 2 or 3-inch heels. I rode my bike in 6-inch stilettos to raise money for Parkinson's research. And gained a lot of attention for Parkinson's awareness. And soon after that, I was invited to be in a woman's pageant, women over 60, to do a pageant. And I, crazily enough, did that too. So it was a lot of fun. But I think it's just really important for people to remember, because I asked them, well, why don't you go take the big program if they're having movement problems? But why don't you take the big program, talk to your doctor, it might be a good fit for you. And they'll say, but I did take it. Well, of course, they didn't continue, or do the For Life one that you're talking about. You have to continue to do these exercises because your body tends to forget. So you have to retrain. It's all about retraining your brain and getting your body to move the way you want it to. And so please remember to do these exercises. It's so important for you.
That's awesome feedback for everybody. So, Ethan, would you say your energy has improved after LSVT Big?
Absolutely, no question. I think it's really given me a lot of increased endurance and energy throughout the day. As with typical Parkinson's symptoms, there are days when you don't, but I think overall, most definitely it has given me that increasing energy that I can do things throughout the day and then after work with my family, and where before it was more of a difficult task than anything. So yeah, no question at all.
And Patty, how about you? It sounds like you have lots of energy now.
Well, some days I wish I had more, but definitely more energy. But another thing that I think is huge is it built up confidence for me to be able to do the things I do now, and did in the past. So confidence and energy are huge, and something that most PD people need, especially the energy level. So if I feel tired, then I go, you know what, you probably need to get up and do some of these exercises. So it's very important.
That's great. That's great. So how would you say your life has changed as a result of completing therapy? Ethan?
Definitely involved in more things, not only with my family, but the community. I gained a friend in my physical therapist. We get together for lunches, and I've just increased my community around me of people with Parkinson's, and then also people without. And it's just been a great way to meet people. As Patty said, telling people to go and do the big. I've been recommending it to people when I'm at other events where people who have been diagnosed but have not heard or gotten the courage to get up and go to big. So it's been a real positive change for me.
That's great. And Patty, how about you?
Well, I'm a motivational speaker now, and I always talk about the big program and how important it is to me and what it did for me. So I had the confidence to become a motivational speaker. So that's helped me a lot. But I, as Ethan, have gained tremendous Parkinson's community and have done a lot of things nationally and internationally that I wouldn't have done before. So it changed my life dramatically.
That's just great. We can't thank you guys enough for your willingness to come and share your stories. We really appreciate you providing others with the examples of how well you've done and how your lives have changed and the motivation for them to keep going and doing the exercises.
No.
So I'm just going to go through and finish the rest of this webinar, and then we'll open it up for questions. So LSVT Global, if for those of you who are listening are looking for a therapist, a certified LSVT clinician, please go to our website at www.lsvtglobal.com. And when you open the front page, you'll see a big red Find an LSVT Clinician block on the right-hand side. If you click on that block, you'll then see another opportunity to identify whether or not you're looking for an LSVT loud therapist or an LSVT big therapist. You click on that dot and then enter your zip code. That's the best way to do it. And then right below that is a sliding scale that indicates how the miles that you're willing to travel. So as you slide the scale, it'll go 10 miles, 20 miles, 50 miles, all the way to 100 miles. And then just below that, you need to click the I agree to the terms and conditions before you click search. And after you click search, a listing of clinicians who are certified in your area or in the area of that zip code will appear with all their information about how to contact them and whether or not they have been certified for life classes as well. So it's a wonderful way to find a clinician in the area near you. Just a reminder for any professionals who might be listening, we have some upcoming live LSVT big certification courses coming in Atlanta, New York, Germany, and Tokyo, and some live LSVT loud certifications as well. Some coming in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, Houston, Texas, New York, and again in Germany. Those seminars, the live seminars, invite patients with Parkinson's disease and their guests to attend a 2-hour free seminar from noon to 2. And really our participants in the workshops often will tell us that that's the best part of the workshop, is when they actually get to work with clients and practice the newly developed skills that they've gained over the 2-day seminar. So those are some opportunities for both professionals and for any patients who might be in those areas. So in summary, LSVT Loud and LSVT Big are intensive, amplitude-based therapy programs that are aimed at improving overall communication and mobility. While the protocols remain the same for every client, the exercises and goals are personalized to help each client reach their highest potential and maintain these improvements over time. So what I'd like to do now is to open the webinar for questions. Again, just a reminder, there are a few ways that you can ask your questions. You can click on the hand icon on your control panel and we'll be alerted that you have a question, and then we can unmute your microphone and call out your name so you know that you're unmuted and can ask your question out loud. You can type in your question to the question box on the control panel, and one of us will read your question to the group out loud. And again, the third way is if we run out of time and we're coming close to the end, you can send your questions to info@lsvtglobal.com as shown on the screen here, and we'll answer your question and get back to you. So I'm looking to see if we have any questions to begin with. I don't see any at this point. Angela, do you have any questions that you want answered?
I do not. I just want to thank Ethan and Patty. That was wonderful for sharing those contributions. It was great to hear your insights about LSVT Big, and Thanks again to Dolores for her contributions of LSVT Loud. And as Beth mentioned, if you have questions later, please, feel free to email us and we'll be happy to answer those.
Okay, I do see a question here. This person is asking, are there any LSVT big classes in Houston? The best way to find that out would be to go to the LSVT Global website and then put in your area code, your zip code for Houston, and then again, the search that'll indicate how many mile radius you're willing to travel, and then the names of the people who are offering those classes would pop up on your screen with the information as to how to contact them. So I'm willing to bet there are some classes some big classes in Houston. So please go to the lsvtglobal.com website and check there.
And I was just going to add, if you're asking about the Big for Life class that follows after you've completed LSVT Big, that will actually show up on, so it'll show as you're searching for an LSVT Big clinician. If they've also taken the training to lead a Big for Life class, it'll show up on their Big for Life class leader as well. So, and if you ever have any issues or questions, or the search doesn't seem to be working, our office staff in Tucson are wonderful at helping to find those resources. So you can always call them as well.
And I see one more question, and then this will be the last one. Angela, you can take this one. What's the cost involved?
For LSVT therapy or for the classes?
It's not clarified.
Okay. For therapy for LSVT Loud and LSVT Big, typically if your insurance covers speech, physical, occupational therapy, usually the therapies themselves are covered by insurance, but you would of course want to talk to your insurance provider. And if you have Medicare, it's just routine, you get that referral from the doctor. For the Loud for Life or Big for Life classes, for people who have graduated from the therapies, those are handled differently based on who's leading the class. And so some classes are offered at no cost, and maybe they're organized through a Parkinson's Association. For example, my class is run through the Parkinson's Association of the Rockies, and they offer it as a part of one of their mini therapy classes that they offer, or I'm sorry, exercise classes such as Tai Chi or boxing or things like that. And then they just suggest a donation if people want to donate. I've heard from other people who are doing classes via their health facility, with maybe a hospital, and there the prices sometimes might range from $5 per person per hour to $10. So it does tend to vary, but it usually all the information I've received, it's either no cost or it's very affordable.
Okay, that looks like all the time we have for today. Again, thank you all so much for your participation. Ethan, Dolores, and Patty, you were all wonderful. And Angela, thanks again so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank
Bye now.
you.